Okay, so I think today I'm going to continue on to the second chapter, second subchapter of the first chapter. External characteristics. Internal characteristics of propaganda. Number one is knowledge of the psychological terrain. The power of propaganda to incite action has often been challenged by the alleged fact that propaganda cannot really modify or create anything in man. We frequently find that psychological manipulations do not appreciably change an individual's firmly established opinion. A communist or a Christian with strong beliefs is very little, if at all, shaken by adverse propaganda. Similarly, a prejudice or a stereotype is hardly ever changed by propaganda. For example, it is almost impossible to break down racial prejudice by propaganda. What people think of Negroes, Jews, bourgeois, or colonialists will only be slightly altered by propaganda attempts. Similarly, a reflex or a myth cannot be created out of nothing, as if the individual were neutral and empty ground on which anything could be built. Furthermore, even when the reflex has been created, it cannot be utilized to make an individual act in just any direction. The individual cannot be manipulated as if he were an object, an automaton. The automatic nature of created reflexes does not transform him into a robot. Interesting. We can conclude from a large body of experience that the propagandist cannot go contrary to what is in an individual. He cannot create just any new psychological mechanism or obtain just any decision or action. But psychologists who make these observations draw a very hasty conclusion from them. That propaganda has very little effect, that it has so limited a field of action that it hardly seems useful. We shall show later why we consider this conclusion incorrect. But the observations themselves give us some very good indications as to what is effective propaganda. So propaganda doesn't just come from nowhere. The propagandist must first of all know as precisely as possible the terrain on which he is operating. He must know the sentiments and opinions. That's why we have Google spying on everything, and cameras watching us everywhere, even the phones. An obvious point of departure is the analysis of the characteristics of the group and its current myths, opinions, and sociological structure. One cannot make just any propaganda any place for anybody. Methods and arguments must be tailored to the type of man to be reached. Propaganda is definitely not an arsenal of ready-made valid techniques and arguments suitable for use anywhere. Obvious errors in this direction have been made in the recent course of propagandist history. And here talks about the history. The propagandist must know the principal symbols of the culture he wishes to attack and the symbols which express each attitude if he is to be effective. The communists always make a thorough study of the content of opinion before launching their propaganda. A person is not sufficient unto himself. He belongs to that whole called culture by the Americans. Each person's psychology is shaped by that culture. He is conditioned by the symbols of that culture and is also a transmitter of that culture. Each time its symbols are changed, he is deeply affected. This is more true for men than women too. Thus one can change him by changing these symbols. The hourglass body changes you. The propagandist will act on this, keeping in mind that the most important man to be reached is the so-says, the so-called marginal man, the most important man to be reached. That is because the man who does not believe what the propagandist says, but who is interested because he does not believe the opposition either. The man who in battle has good reason to lay down his arms. And that's number 6 and 7. Oh, let's go to number 7. Beyond this, propaganda must vary according to circumstances. The propagandist must constantly readjust it according to changes in situation and also according to changes made by his opponent. The content of propaganda has special reference to the opponent and must therefore change if he changes. That's for the arsenal comment. And the history comment is, here one can see the famous boomerang. He is wrong in his analysis of a milieu. The propagandist may create the reverse effect of what he expected. And his propaganda can turn against him. That's why they keep us kind of confused about what is going on around us. So we cannot create our own propaganda. We are victims of their propaganda. These are innumerable examples of this. Korean War, Americans wanted to show prisoners were well treated. So they showed pictures of war prisoners that play sports, etc. But their eyes were blacked out, so they could not be recognized in the pictures. But the Chinese saw the eyes gouged out, and they thought that the Americans are gouging out eyes of their prisoners. And they always knew that prisoners are never treated well, and that's the husband in the marriage too, huh? Pretty much prisoners of the woman in the state, the Jezebel and the priesthood behind her. So poor guys get their eyes gouged out and their wallets and all that shit. Their kids. The technique of propaganda consists in precisely calculating the desired action in terms of the individual who is to be made to act. The second conclusion seems to us embodied in the following rule. Never make a direct attack on an established, reasoned, durable opinion or an accepted cliché, a fixed pattern. So they never make direct attacks on our ideas or the accepted patterns and cliches. because they would wear themselves out in such a contest. A propagandist who tries to change mass opinion on a precise and well established point is a bad propagandist. But that does not mean that he must then leave things as they are and conclude that nothing can be done. He need only understand two subtle aspects of this problem. First of all, we recall that there is not necessarily any continuity between opinion or fixed patterns and action. There is neither consistency nor logic, and a man can perfectly well hold on to his property, his business, factory, and still vote communist. Or he can be enthusiastic about social justice and peace, as described by the communists, the biggest mass murderers of them all, and still vote for a conservative party. Attacking an established opinion or stereotype head-on would make the propagandist aware of basic inconsistencies and would produce unexpected results. So they don't want the propagandist to be too aware of the details and the logic steps. The skillful propagandist will seek to obtain action without demanding consistency. Oh yeah. That chick was all laid back about me dropping speeches and stuff. Because she was a skillful propagandist. She was getting enough action out of me, so demanding consistency would just make me resent more. So it was like, without fighting prejudices and images, by taking his stance deliberately on inconsistencies. So, very curious as to an individual's opinions and speech and ideas, studying the prey, so then they can target the inconsistencies. Alright, second, the propagandist can alter opinions by diverting them from their accepted course, by changing them, or by placing them in an ambiguous context. Feelings and emotions, emotional arguments. The most frequent response is that of, other methods of altering opinion are to offer forms of action or to provoke rifts in a group. Other methods of altering opinion are to offer forms of action, to provoke rifts in a group, or to create a feeling of aggression towards some specified object. Yours truly. Therefore, okay, so let's go back to the last page. The most frequent response of something is that of flight. Oh yeah, right here. Establishing an established opinion or stereotype head-on would make the propagandist aware of basic inconsistencies. Okay, so the most frequent response when a person is made aware of these basic inconsistencies is that of flight, heading for the hills. So in the face of direct propaganda against a prejudice, the propagandist flees. He rejects, often unconsciously, what he is told. He wants no part of it, or she wants no part of it. She justifies herself by dissociating herself from what is attacked, projecting the attack onto another person, and so on. But she does not change. Okay, so that's that thing, and then we talked about the different ways of altering opinion. Damn, that's crazy. Offer forms of action that can alter opinion by diverting. Shit. Anyway, to provoke rifts in the group, that playing the two sides against each other to change problem reaction solution again. So either get them running on the treadmill or cause drama in the groups, or to turn a feeling of aggression towards one specified object. I actually willingly did that in the club because I wanted to see how they would deal with the kicking out an individual from the group aspect of the club. But I got kind of carried away with the emotions too. But starting from apparently fixed and immovable positions, we can lead a man or woman where he or she does not want to go, without his or her being aware of it, or paths that he or she will not notice. And I think Eyes Wide Shut was a movie like that, and so was The Wicker Man, where we saw these tricks being played on an individual. So in this way, propaganda against German rearmament, organized by the partisans of peace.
Right, beer for you.
Thank you. And ultimately favorable to the Soviet Union, utilized the anti-German sentiment of the French right. Thus, existing opinion is not to be contradicted but utilized. Each individual harbors a large number of stereotypes and established tendencies. From this arsenal, the propagandists must select those easiest to mobilize. Okay, I think I'll continue with this next time, because there's still a lot of pages left.